Shocking similarities in the racist and purist fetish of neo-Nazis in Ukraine and elites in Pakistan. Welcome to Progress Post, a channel where you get opinions upfront on multiple issues of concern to everyone. I'm Dev Kumar, and today we'll look into a very interesting and intriguing comparison between war-torn Ukraine and strife-ridden Pakistan, and how the ruling elites in both these countries perpetuate a vicious racist and purist agenda against their eastern neighbors, Russia and India respectively. Yes, you would be shocked to know about these strange but shocking similarities between the ruling elites in both Ukraine and Pakistan and how they perceive their racist and purist fetish. The Russians knew about this racist and purist fetish among Ukrainian elites all along and are now fighting a dreadful war because they ignored the threat and didn't do anything to keep it at bay. What about Indians? How many of us know about this particular side of the Pakistani ruling elites, wherein they not just see Indians as infidels, but also as an inferior people who should be enslaved and wiped out? More interestingly, Pakistan and Ukraine actually have a pretty close working relationship, especially in defense-related matters, and they are much closer than what appears on the surface. It also explains why Russia is so keen to build closer relations with Pakistan, much to the indignation of individuals in India who still romanticize the Indo-Soviet relationship of the past. We're indeed living in very interesting times. Right then, let's get started with the topic at hand and see what comes out of it. If you haven't subscribed to Progress Post as yet, then please do so for in-depth analysis of lesser-known topics of high importance from around the world. Do watch the video till the end and also share your opinion. It might seem strange to you that a comparison of intriguing similarities between two distinctly different countries, Ukraine and Pakistan, is being spoken about here. One is a European country and the other is an Asian country. One is Christian and the other is Muslim. One has white-skinned people and the other has brown-skinned people. One is industrialized while the other is just partly industrialized. As you can see, along with all other differences, the Pakistanis and the Ukrainians belong to different racial groups, and yet they seem to have the same kind of hatred for people of their neighboring countries belonging to the same race as themselves. Both nations have been carved out of two large countries, one with the largest land area in the world, that is Russia, and the other with the largest population in the world, that is India. It is likely that most folks don't realize where exactly the comparison between Pakistan and Ukraine begins. Yes, most Hindu folks in India and elsewhere have a general idea of the hatred that most Pakistanis have for them. These Hindu folks believe that the reason for such hatred is based on religious differences only, since the Pakistanis consider Hindus as infidels or non-believers. But they don't know that the ruling elites, especially the clergy of Pakistan, have a deep-rooted hatred of everything Hindu and Indian, whom they consider vermin and belonging to an inferior race, even though they are of the same racial stock. These elites of Pakistan believe they are of Turk, Arab and Persian origin, but interestingly enough, the Turks, Arabs and Persians don't accept that and reject these bizarre claims of the Pakistanis. As far as the neo-Nazi ruling elites of Ukraine are concerned, most Indians following the war in Ukraine don't know that the Ukrainian elites have the same feeling about Russians, whom they consider uncivilized and of an inferior race, even though they are of the same Slavic stock. Let's take a closer look at the roots of violent social hatred for Russians that is manifested in the thoughts, words and deeds of the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and how it goes right back in time to Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party. We all know about Hitler and his misdeeds that have brought untold suffering to such a large number of people in Europe and Eurasia, especially the Russians and the Jews, but also millions of other folks as well. So what is it that led Hitler to do what he ended up doing? That is, slaughter tens of millions of innocent people in cold blood. It was his belief that the German people, whom he categorized as Aryans, to be the supreme race among humans, which formed the basis of his ideology that the German Aryans should rule over all other races of people in the world. Formulating an ideology on paper is one thing, but implementing it for real is quite another. Hitler not just believed in this ideology, but was obsessed with the idea of implementing it, and that led to a direct confrontation with all other major powers of the world at that time, especially Russia. Hitler's hatred for Russia was as pathological as was his hatred for the Jews. He dreamt and fantasized about occupying the whole of Russia, where his German Aryan countrymen could resettle and flourish to rule the world. This was perceived as Lebensraum, a German term that corresponds with extra or additional land for the master race, or some such nonsense. And what was to happen to the natives of the land? The Russians? Hitler considered Russians as nothing but vermin, who should be enslaved and wiped out. You must be wondering if all this is real. Can any human think up such a beastly and devilish ideology? Unfortunately, yes. Hitler and his pals did so and decided to invade the Soviet Union, as Russia was known then. This is where Ukraine, which was a province of Russia then, comes into play, because the main thrust of the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, with over 200 divisions of the German army, aided by their air force and numbering over 2 million men in all, was to pass through the flat, undulating terrain of Ukraine. Now let's connect the dots and understand how neo-Nazi ideology struck roots in Ukraine, especially since the Ukrainians are of Slavic stock, whom Hitler and his Nazi thugs despised anyway. To understand that, let's take a closer look at the population composition of Ukraine. About 40% of the country's population comprises of ethnic Russians, most of whom live in eastern Ukraine, in the lands east of the river Dnieper that flows right through the center of the country. The remaining 60% of the population, who are the majority in Ukraine, are essentially non-Russian East European Slavic people who identify themselves as the real Ukrainians and live mostly in the western half of the country. This ethnic Ukrainian group never liked the Russians and would go against Russia at the first opportunity. The Nazis knew about this fault line in Ukraine and decided to exploit it when they entered the country, and the Soviet military pulled back in the face of the gigantic German military juggernaut. When the Nazis asked for cooperation from these Ukrainians, they were more than ready to cooperate with the Nazis, who made full use of the opportunity and integrated them more closely with the Nazi agenda. Of course, you can understand what that means, learning all about the dance of death and destruction. The leader of the Ukrainians who collaborated with the Nazis was a man named Stephen Bandera, and it is also not difficult to understand the kind of mentality this man had. He was among the first Nazis of Ukraine and is said to have committed atrocities and mass murder of innocent Russian, Jewish, Polish and other folks on a scale that can match the atrocities of the German Nazis in Ukraine. So, that's when the Nazi ideology got embedded in the non-Russian segment of the Ukrainian population, and it managed to survive through the 5 decades of Soviet rule before the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991. Today, Stephen Bandera, whose memory was banned across Ukraine during Soviet times, is considered a national hero in Ukraine. The Ukrainian neo-Nazis openly display Bandera's portrait along with Nazi emblems and insignia during their marches, and they are in full control of the country today. After the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the American CIA began to penetrate Ukraine, and before long, they found their way right up to the influential sections of Ukrainians that harbor a pathological hatred of Russians. The CIA not just had no qualms about collaborating with this racist and xenophobic grouping, but actually backed these neo-Nazis to come into their elements in full public view and eventually help them grab power in Ukraine after the Maidan coup in February 2014. The outcome of this coup, which the Western media calls the Maidan Revolution, has proved to be disastrous for Ukraine. This brings us to the end of part 1 of this post. There's much more about the parallels between Ukraine and Pakistan that will come in the subsequent parts of this post. To get notified about the next post and all other subsequent posts, you need to get a notification, which you can only get when you subscribe to the channel. So if you haven't subscribed to Progress Post yet, then please do subscribe now. And if you have watched the post this far, then you would have surely found it interesting. So please like and share it as well. Thank you.